Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into a pretty powerful YouTube video transcript from Jordan Peterson. It's called Fix Yourself Before It's Too Late.
Yeah, it's quite direct.
It really is. And for you listening, this dive offers a potent look at taking ownership, embracing real growth and chasing a life that feels meaningful. So our aim here is to unpack the core ideas, dig into some insights that really jumped out, and maybe identify some practical steps you could actually think about using.
Absolutely. And as we get into this, the key theme that keeps coming up is um, the need to really confront yourself, honestly.
Right.
Peterson kicks things off with this interesting point about asking stupid questions.
Oh, yeah, I remember that bit.
It's funny how we often dodge the very questions that could help us grow, isn't it? Usually out of fear of looking, well, ignorant.
Yeah, that social awkwardness thing.
Exactly. And it just keeps you stuck in that ignorance. So Peterson's point is about how, being a bit vulnerable can actually be really liberating when you're trying to learn something.
Okay, let's dig into that. He says you only really need to ask a stupid question once. Which makes sense when you think about it. You admit you don't know, someone tells you, and boom, that gap is filled. Gone.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, what's one thing I might be doing, or maybe not understanding right now, that just one question could fix?
Yeah, maybe something you even want to change. Recognizing that want is often the first step.
Exactly.
And that flows right into this core idea. Self-honesty, being genuinely honest with yourself to see where you can, well, do better.
Yeah.
Peterson suggests this exercise. Finding a quiet moment, being alone, and asking yourself something very specific.
This is where it gets quite intense, I thought. He
Okay.
really stresses the need for sincerity. It's not just, casually thinking about it.
No, not at all.
He suggests you need to feel a real dissatisfaction, maybe even like a deep unease or cynicism, bitterness even.
That sort of weight.
And then, with that feeling, you ask, what's one thing I'm doing wrong? And this is key, that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix.
So specific, isn't it?
Very. It's not just what are my weaknesses. It's concrete, something you're actually prepared to change.
And the answers that come up, Peterson suggests they're not going to be the easy ones. Not what you want to hear.
No, probably the opposite.
Right. The stuff you need to hear. And often, they're small things, he says. These little micro improvements.
Which is kind of encouraging, actually.
It is, isn't it? The idea that big changes can come from these small, consistent shifts in, like, daily habits or actions.
Yeah.
He thinks making those little adjustments day to day can lead to surprisingly fast progress overall.
And he links this kind of intense self-honesty to what he sees in, quote, great people. He says the really remarkable folks he knows are brutally honest with themselves and with others. And that seems to go along with them living these, well, adventurous lives.
Yeah, it makes you think about that connection, doesn't it? Inner truthfulness and the willingness to step outside your comfort zone.
Definitely.
And then you see the contrast, the danger of not living with that self-honesty. Peterson talks about how when you say something or do something that isn't true to yourself, it's almost like it's not really you.
Right, like something else is driving.
Exactly. He says, if you're saying something you don't really believe, it's like letting a spirit of manipulation take over.
I mean, you can think of small examples, right? Agreeing with someone just to keep the peace, even if you disagree inside.
Totally. And doing that repeatedly.
Yeah.
That might be what he means. Your actions get driven by, pleasing others or avoiding conflict, not your own internal compass.
He gives that example of the student writing what the professor wants to hear.
Yeah. They get the grade, maybe, but the real them didn't earn it, didn't get the understanding.
So what's the long-term cost of living like that?
Well, Peterson argues it leads to bitterness because you're not living your life. You're living the life dictated by that manipulative force you've let in.
You end up playing a role that isn't really yours.
Exactly. Trapped, in a way.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit. He then really emphasizes reading, learning from other people's experiences and ideas.
He sees it as vital, a way to gain wisdom without always having to learn things the hard way. The famous school of hard knocks.
Right, avoid some pain if you can.
And his analogy is interesting. He says just encountering an idea or a solution once in a book makes you infinitely better than never seeing it.
Like those brain teasers or riddles.
Yeah. Once you know the trick or the principle, you can't really be fooled by that specific kind of puzzle again in the same way.
He also talks about setting up your peers on your shelf.
I like that phrase.
Me too. Reading authors from different times, different places. It's
Yeah.
like building your own personal advisory board.
Yeah, surrounding yourself with minds maybe more experienced or insightful than your own right now. He admits it can be disruptive sometimes.
Challenges your thinking.
But that's where the value is, right? That growth.
And the practical side, the value proposition.
Huge, according to Peterson.
Yeah.
You get access to potentially decades or even centuries of distilled knowledge in a pretty short time.
He mentioned that anxiety book, didn't he?
Right, the neuropsychology of anxiety.
Yeah.
Spent 6 months reading it, he said, and gained an understanding that took the author maybe 30 years to build.
Wow. That's efficient.
Very. It's about getting a grounded, maybe scientific understanding, moving beyond just vague ideas.
And building on that idea of understanding, he gets into language itself.
Yeah.
Using Shakespeare as an example.
Yeah, and he's honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
Says reading Shakespeare at first can feel like, well, learning a foreign language almost.
Mm.
Dense, unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm.
But the key is the active work needed, the interpretation. He talks about the weight of the words in Shakespeare.
Pregnant with meaning, I think he said.
That's it. You have to really parse them, analyze them to get the full depth.
And he connects this directly to, like, real-world stuff. He mentioned working with the SEAL teams again.
Yeah, how grappling with Shakespeare actually helped him break down complex documents like rules of engagement.
Seriously.
He'd pick out words he wasn't totally sure about, look up all the definitions, the history, the etymology, using the Oxford English Dictionary,
Wow.
and then explain that precise meaning to the team.
That's taking it seriously.
It shows how he sees words, not just labels, but ancient artifacts.
Right, with history baked in. Living in a word ecosystem.
Exactly, like how words change meaning over time in different contexts.
Yeah.
Understanding those connections unlocks deeper meaning. So knowing language better isn't just academic.
It helps you understand yourself and others.
And communicate more effectively, more precisely.
Which leads naturally to this idea of a moral imperative around being articulate and competent.
Yeah, he argues that becoming truly competent is a worthwhile goal and presents this choice: be competent and dangerous, or
Vague and useless. Pretty stark.
it is. And he makes this really strong claim. Being articulate is one of the most powerful ways to have influence, for good or ill.
So mastering your own language, your tongue, it's
Yeah.
a moral duty.
That's how he frames it. A fundamental responsibility.
Okay, let's shift again. He talks about struggle, how it's unavoidable if you're aiming for anything worthwhile.
Right. Progress is never just a straight line up. There are always obstacles.
He used that analogy of a messy room causing anxiety.
Yeah, the power of external order reflecting internal state, kind of, and then flips it, saying maybe we don't really repress difficult things.
We just fail to unpack them.
Fail to really process what we don't want to face.
He talks about this innate human desire for a horizon of ever-expanding possibility, that drive to walk uphill.
Yeah, to take on challenges. And he warns against goals that are purely instrumental.
Like things you achieve and then just feel flat, that now what feeling.
Exactly. He has that image of the giant infant with a gold bottle.
Huh. Yeah, that's memorable. Unsatisfied despite having the prize.
The better state, he says, is being an active warrior moving uphill, engaged in the striving.
And this requires faith. Faith in the truth.
Even when the truth is hard, initially. He believes the person you become by living truthfully is, by definition, good.
And he links aspiration and responsibility tightly together.
You can't really have one without the other, he argues. You need to aim for something valuable.
And taking responsibility for yourself, family, community, that is a valuable aim.
Right. Meaning in life comes from having those aspirations, having a hierarchy of values. And he makes a point that attacking the idea of hierarchy itself actually destroys aspiration.
Interesting connection.
He thinks humans are just built for a struggle, built to take on a heavy burden voluntarily.
And growth is proportional to the burden you choose to carry.
Yeah, with apparently no upper limit. He also links positive emotion, especially enthusiasm, to having a goal you're moving towards.
Ideally one you can never quite reach. So you keep moving.
Right. Continuous progress. He even reframes the Sisyphus myth. It's not about the pointless task.
It's about the self-development during the climb.
Exactly. The resilience you build pushing the rock.
He contrasts that with the fantasy of just chilling, Mykonos on the beach.
Yeah, that passive state, often involving, substances to numb things. It's short-lived, he says, and leads to feeling like a laughingstock, depressed, aimless.
Because the deeper desire is for that horizon, that uphill climb, not just comfort.
Hmm. Which brings us to the adventure of truthfulness.
Okay.
He notes that starting to be truthful, especially with yourself, means really facing your own flaws, your inadequacies.
Which requires humility, right, and can be painful.
Definitely painful. But without that truthfulness, you end up just playing a role you sort of drifted into, and that drains the meaning out of life.
So the true adventure comes from embracing truth in what you think and what you do.
That's the idea. It unfolds from there.
He also emphasizes focusing on your own problems, identifying them, solving them.
Yeah, he suggests paying attention to what really bothers you, or what you find most challenging. That discomfort can actually guide you,
Reveal strengths or directions you hadn't considered.
potentially. He talks about the things that grip you, even if they start out feeling like resentment or bitterness. They're often deeply personal, significant.
And the process, he suggests, find a question you really want answered.
Hmm. Approach it with humility, like, okay, this is a mystery, I don't know, and then be open to the thoughts that, well, appear.
He also mentions intention mattering there.
Big time. Are you trying to make things better? Or just trying to make things worse, or prove yourself right? That shapes the kind of thoughts you'll generate or attract.
He acknowledges facing big problems is daunting. Uses those myths, Hydra, Gorgon, Basilisk.
Yeah, scary stuff. But the upside, he argues, is huge. Having a problem worth solving gives you a reason to get up, a purpose.
The antidote to bitterness, he called it.
Sure.
Then there's taking responsibility for the past and the present.
Hmm. He suggests that really thoroughly owning up to past mistakes, past failures to do the right thing, that can actually change things, not just for you, but ripple outwards.
He also says allow yourself some room for error, though.
Yeah, be a bit forgiving as you try to improve,
Yeah,
which connects to his make a bad plan idea.
right. Just start doing something. Make a plan, any plan almost.
Implement it, see where it's flawed, because it probably will be.
And then fix it, iterate, learn from doing.
Precisely. And the key metric for success isn't comparing yourself to others.
It's comparing yourself to who you were yesterday.
Hmm. Because comparing to others is tricky. You don't know their struggles, their hidden burdens. It's not a fair comparison.
He seems optimistic that you can make yourself a little better each day.
Yeah, through conscious effort, even if how it works is a bit mysterious. And it also requires recognizing when your own viewpoint, your frame of reference, is faulty.
Being open to different ways of thinking, creative thinking, lateral thinking.
Right. Finding ways you're wrong is incredibly useful, he thinks.
He also talks about time, the compounding value of using it well, especially when young.
Oh, yeah. The cost of wasted time. He even puts it in financial terms sometimes. It adds a sense of urgency to this whole self-improvement project.
Definitely. Which kind of leads into his points about writing.
Right. Writing is formalized thinking. He's very serious about learning to write well.
He says good writing starts with a real problem, something you genuinely want to figure out.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just performing. False from the start, he says. You have to engage with the material until it grips you.
Which means reading a lot first, presumably.
Absolutely, that's the foundation. Then the writing process itself is this intense mental workout.
Sorting information, summarizing, finding contradictions.
Refining words, sentences, organizing it all into a coherent argument. He says it integrates your personality at the highest level, sharpens your thinking like nothing else.
And over years, it hones your words, which he calls the most powerful thing about you.
Mm-hmm. Effective writers, speakers, they gain this authority, this confidence. He even says that's maybe the real point of a humanities degree.
To teach you how to think, mainly through writing.
That's his take. And the practical benefits are obvious: strategizing, negotiating, inspiring people.
Get your words together, man. That makes you unstoppable. That was a quote, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty direct. He criticizes universities for not really explaining why writing matters so much beyond just getting grades.
The real goal is learning to think clearly, which leads to effective action, winning the battles you choose.
For good reasons, hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
Thinking, speaking, writing it makes you absolutely deadly, he says, but in a positive way.
Like effective, competent.
Right. Successful people are often hard to argue with because their points are just organized, articulate.
So from articulation to discipline, he sees that as foundational too.
Absolutely. Discipline is the bedrock for freedom. Potential in childhood needs discipline to become actual freedom later.
He defines discipline as the imposition of order, especially needed if you feel hopeless or nihilistic.
Mm-hmm. And if you hate the idea of discipline, like hating waking up early, maybe that just means you lack discipline, not that waking up early is inherently bad for you.
It requires self-awareness. If you keep doing things that make you hate yourself, maybe stop. Consider the cost.
Yeah. And valuable things require sacrifice. That's a key human insight, he thinks. Distinguishes us from animals, the understanding of sacrifice for future gain.
So laying this structure on yourself, it actually leads to more freedom, like the concert pianist.
Exactly. Their freedom on stage comes from thousands of hours of disciplined practice. Freedom is purchased at the price of discipline.
And failing to organize yourself has consequences, not just for you.
Right. For others around you, too. So
Mm.
his advice is practical. Start where you can start.
Fix the small things you notice need fixing.
Yeah. Tidy your room, sort out your routines. Those daily habits make up a huge chunk of life, so fixing them can have a massive impact.
Okay, so bringing it all together, he presents this fundamental choice: meaningful life versus meaningless life.
Yeah, it's a stark binary he sets up. A meaningless life means nothing really matters. It's all about impulsive pleasure, no responsibility.
Pleasure Island again? Or Neverland?
Those kinds of analogies.
Yeah.
Whereas a meaningful life means what you do does matter. Mistakes have real consequences. So you have to be awake, take responsibility.
And identity forms through that process, correcting errors, those aha moments.
When your explicit ideas finally click with your implicit understanding, he also warns about just building social media personas.
Like Pinocchio, a puppet whose strings are pulled by others.
Right, who sets your role. These personas can hide your real flaws, and you might end up acting out a tragedy that isn't even yours.
They aren't the real thing.
No. The true adventure, he repeats, comes from being truthful, authentic.
He mentioned his own earlier goals, didn't he? Like wanting wealth, the fancy car, trying to get rid of chaos.
Yeah. And then realizing that the struggle itself is actually crucial for feeling fulfilled. He referenced gold medal depression, achieving the goal and feeling empty.
Because we're built to walk uphill.
That's the core idea again. The value comes from the climb itself. Positive feelings are tied to pursuing those meaningful, often difficult goals.
So as we kind of wrap this up, it's a pretty powerful argument he makes, isn't it? Radical self-honesty, continuous learning through reading and language.
The moral need for articulation, and that basic idea that meaning comes from voluntarily taking on responsibility and chasing hard goals.
The self-improvement journey. It sounds tough, but he frames it as the ultimate adventure.
Yeah, demanding but rewarding.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, based on all this. Consider just one area, maybe a small one, where, deep down you could be a bit more truthful with yourself. What's that one, maybe slightly uncomfortable, stupid question you've been avoiding asking yourself? And what might happen if you actually sought the answer?